We have been studying Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Kena Upanishad, where the text so far, having taken us through the parable of the gods, has taught us that all the powers within, our mind, our intelligence, our life energies, our self, our senses, all of these are conscious powers referred to as the gods in their cosmic functioning as well as in their individual or functioning within our individuality. Our intelligence, of which we are so proud, is not ours. It is part of a larger cosmic intelligence. Our life energy also is only a focal point in this form of the body of a universal life energy. Even our sense, working of the senses and the perceptions of the senses are part of a larger universal sense perception of the universal mind and intelligence. The evidence for this is obvious when we look a little beyond this superficial phenomena. It's an example which we have used before on many occasions, but it is worth recalling here. If you observe the working of the eye or the working of the ears, all of us have completely different surface of the sensory apparatus of the skin inside the eyes, which receive the light, They're differently arranged in each one of our eyes. The wiring of the nerves which take the signals from this to the brain are completely different in each one of us. The arrangement of the brain cells, again, is not only different between each one of us, it even changes over the years as we grow. And although the entire apparatus is different, each one of us experiences the color red as red, green as green, blue as blue. How is this possible? As we are aware, it's not the particular registration in the retina which makes for the experience of red. It is the signals going to the brain which convey that registration, and it is there that we would experience redness. Not even there, it is in the brain and the way it interprets those signals that we would experience the red. The pattern of those signals is in each one of us. Those signals is distinct in each one of us. And yet we all see red. We could, of course, question this. We would say, perhaps we see different things, but we have been taught to call it red. But again, we can apply a very simple test. When we see red and blue, and you ask anybody, which one feels cooler, which one feels warmer, everybody will say the blue is cooler, the red is warmer. The experience of the color is the same. It's not a question of interpretation. It's not a question of being taught. How is this possible? And the yogic answer to this is that, in fact, it's not even the brain which sees, it is the mind working through the brain that sees. It is the mind which takes the registration coming from the physical senses and the brain and has the experience of the actual sight. Ah, this is red. And that mind within one head and in somebody else's head, although appearing different, because we all tend to think differently, is part of a larger universal mind, which is the mind which sees. It is in the universal mind that the experience of red has been seen as red and blue as blue. It is in the universal mind the experience of the vibration we call blue is experienced as cooling and red as warming. And therefore our mind, being a part of the universal mind, shares in the same experience. Now there are those in whom the physical sight is defective, we call them colorblind, and who will tend to blur between two colors. Maybe they cannot distinguish between green and red sometimes. That's often one of the patterns. And we can see how in the registration signals going to the brain, these two are indistinguishable. So the mind is still receiving something coming through the body, and it sees that differently. And yet, the fact that it sees the two blurred as the same color, green or red or whatever it is, the blurred identity of the colors, that is universal among all. All of this points to the simple conclusion that our mind is part of a universal mind, and our senses and the perceptions of the senses are part of that. Its values, what it considers, what it sees, are what we perceive less or more completely. When we perceive less, then we will say our senses are defective. When we perceive more completely, then our senses are functioning well. This also explains why, in certain abnormal conditions, the senses may function completely normal even though the biology is damaged. There is a classic example which has been medically studied and recorded, where I think it was during the First World War in Europe, that this soldier who was supposed to be blind, Frenchman, was supposed to be blind, was found to be able to see under certain circumstances and to see perfectly. And he would lose his sight every time that he was agitated emotionally. When he became calm and silent, he would be able to see, and when he was agitated, he would lose sight. Although the physical eyes and the biology of the eyes was damaged, he would still be able to see. And the fact that the sight, not being physically supported, was abnormal in the sense it was disturbed by emotions, shows you the actual seeing is taking place on a layer which is not biological. And if that layer is disturbed, as our psychology and anger disturbs us, that seeing is clouded. So, looking at all the evidence, we can say that our capacity to see, in fact, is in that layer of the mind. To the extent that the mind and biology are aligned and sufficiently developed, we see more or we see less. But the actual power of seeing belongs to this universal mind, in which the full seeing is possible. In fact, because it sees, therefore we are able to see. This is what the Kena Upanishad has been driving us to. From its very first verse, where it asks this question, what is it that in the eyes and ears set them to their working? And this term specifically is, they use the word, by what God set eye and ear to their working? Or the same principle now extended is, by whom impelled is this word that men speak? When we speak, there is a power again which already knows what you want to speak before you speak a word. You see little children, when you ask a certain question or there's a challenge, they'll rush forward. I want to say, okay, you go ahead and speak. And then the person starts stuttering, fumbling, unsure, speaks a few words, hesitates, goes back, speaks differently. And you say, but go on. The struggle is in the articulation through the mind and words. But the impulse inside already knows what you want to say. That's why you rushed forward to say, yes, I will answer. This is often the case when we try to articulate certain deep experiences, even emotional experiences, or certain very complex thoughts, which cannot be reduced to simple ideas or words. We want to express, but whatever words we use somehow fall short. And we need so many more words as if to try to complete, and even then it sounds confused. But the thing itself is known, what we wish to express. And it shows that even in the impulsion of speech, there is a deeper speech of our speech, as there is sight of our sight and hearing of our hearing. And then again it asks in the first verse, by whom yoked moves the first life breath forward on its paths? What drives the life energy within us? Again reminding us there is a larger source, not just the universal life force, but a deeper source which is life of our life. And the very first question it asks, by whom missioned falls the mind shot to its mark? What leads the mind's intelligence to act the way it does, to express its intelligence? Now all of this we have seen, but in the sequence of what we have been shown now, these psychological powers are working in us, which are not ours, they are cosmic powers. They are themselves functioning irrespective of our biological or individual human development. In fact, as the evolution turns upwards and tries to develop, it is these powers which align with the rising impulse of evolution and assist in forming the biological structures through which they can work most effectively. It's the reason why we will see, even on earthly evolution and the evidence in the fossils, that the form of the working of the eye has appeared not once, but many times. As many as 6 times it is evidenced. That independently the eye has been developed again and again, and always with a similar structure. Some unusual variations like what we see in the eyes of the fly, which is called a compound eye. But again, the principle there is common. How is it that by chance, since evolution is supposed to have happened by chance, how is it that by chance, so many different times, the same structure has emerged? And in each time it has happened, the development of a fully functioning eye involves 13 different steps, each of which is entirely useless by itself. So first you have to have one genetic modification, useless, no benefit. Upon that modification, a second modification, again no benefit. Third and fourth and fifth. And then after 13 are completed, suddenly you have a working eye. And this has happened by chance, not once but at least 6 times. How do you explain that? And the only explanation, again from the yogic perspective, is that there is something already which holds the potential of physical sight, which works with the rising biology, embedding and working in it, shapes its working, assisting it to develop a fully functioning organ for its action. And because it is assisting, it is embedded in the very formation of the eye. And therefore it functions. Therefore also, something which we had discussed several times the last few weeks, when our mind enters the sight and enjoys the seeing, it amplifies the power of the sight. When we tend to withdraw our sight because it is disturbing, it weakens the working of the eyes. We saw this example: if a child is not allowed to experience through the senses do not develop fully. The more pleasant and joyous sensory experiences, the more the development of the senses physically. The nerves grow more rich, more fine, more active. And it's a two-way contact. The reverse happens, you will notice, in children who have some discomfort with their environment. Often if they grow up in a difficult environment where there is some emotional tension always, they tend to not want to look. And the psychological tendency to want to withdraw very quickly becomes an inability to see far. And they have what we call myopic sight. Why they're used to wanting to look close, not look too far, because that's not very comfortable. If you can get rid of this psychological knot, the eyes relax and suddenly they can see completely clearly. All of these point to one single truth: the power of the sight, of the senses, of the life energies, even of the mind and the intelligence, are already cosmic working powers. And therefore they are referred to as the gods. Their working in us is a specialized working, and to that extent also dependent on the biology and our conscious participation. And so in this text, in the guidance given to become conscious of the divine, we are first taught that of the divine which is in you, which is you, of that you must think, and that which is in the gods, of that you must think. So the Kena takes us not only to the awareness that behind our normal working there is this cosmic working, but behind the gods there is that which is the true seer, the true speaker, the true intelligence, the true life of our life. And we are being led, therefore, from our normal human experience to a first level of awakening where we recognize there is a cosmic working of which we are a smaller part. But the cosmic working itself is a reflection of a diviner working, a diviner intelligence, sight and life, of which we are a crude, even distorted representation. In the portion we had just completed reading, the advice given by the Divine Mother to these gods is, she said to him, to Indra, "It is the eternal. Of the eternal is this victory in which you shall grow to greatness." And so this idea is brought to us that by recognizing that all the powers within us and their success are not really ours, but are the success and the powers of the divine, we turn to the source and consciously submit, surrender this working to that. And increasingly, as we are able to do this and become clear in our stillness of surrender, passivity in reception, that action begins to reflect and work through us more and more directly. And so this is what we last read. What happens then is that this divine unnameable reflects himself openly in the gods, in their working in us. His light takes possession of the thinking mind. His power and joy of the life. Our life energies grow in power and joy, but that power and joy. His light and rapture of the emotional mind and the senses. Something of the supreme image of Brahman falls upon the world nature and changes it into divine nature. So far, our nature was only a portion of universal nature. But as we are able to turn in this conscious aspiration and a passive receptivity, passive to the action of that, active in its aspiration, as we grow in this, that reflects, and our world nature, all human beings having the same thing, grows more and more and changes into a divine nature. Which interestingly is not happening everywhere in the universe. It happens only in that part which consciously receives and reflects. And so what we see here, a large universal action within which are all these focal points that are conscious beings, and within the focal point of the conscious being, the possibility of consciously turning to the source beyond the universe and beginning to receive and reflect that. And where that happens, something grows beyond the universal ordinary nature and begins to reflect and express a divine nature. This is the direction in which conscious evolution takes us. In fact, if you wait long enough, the automatic slow evolution of nature will grow towards that even eventually. But we have become conscious, we are able to recognize, we are able to be conscious of the source, enter in relation with it consciously, and so this subsequent evolution can be taken up consciously much more rapidly. In a sense, the entire universe waits for this moment, where we wake up and become conscious participants and aspirants for this possibility of divinizing our life. And so this is the passage now that Sri Aurobindo is focusing upon. The chapter dealing with it he has titled The Transfiguration of the Self and the Gods. Because not only within us, our consciousness, the sense of who I am, undergoes a transformation, but also the working of the gods, universal powers within us, undergoes also a transformation. In the portion now we will read, Sri Aurobindo takes up specifically 2 verses of the Kena, which deal with the nature of this passage. So Sri Aurobindo first in his commentary says, all this change of world nature into divine nature, all this is not done by a sudden miracle. It comes by flashes, revelations, sudden touches and glimpses, and so on. He discusses the way this transition takes place. It refers to 2 verses in the 4th part of the Kena, verse 4 and verse 5, whose translation I will read out and then we will see Sri Aurobindo's commentary. The translation follows the rhythm of the Sanskrit vocabulary, and so it is obviously dense and cryptic, but when we read the commentary it will be obvious. Verse 4, now this is the indication of that. Okay? This is the indication of that. As is this flash of the lightning upon us, or as is this falling of the eyelids. so in that which is of the gods. So it's pointing to three things in this, which is a indication of that. The flash of lightning, sudden flash. Falling of the eyelids, and we will see what that represents. And then that working of the gods. And verse 5, then in that which is of the self. So this looks at not the working of the outer, but inside. Who am I? In that consciousness. Then in that which is of the self, as the motion of this mind seems to attain to that, and by it afterwards, the will in the thought continually remembers it. So cryptic enough, we look at Sri Aurobindo's commentary. All this is not done by a sudden miracle. It comes by flashes, revelations, sudden touches and glimpses. There is as if a leap of the lightning of revelation flaming out from those heavens for a moment, and then returning into its secret source. As if the lifting of the eyelid of an inner vision, and it's falling again, because the eye cannot look long and steadily on the utter light. The repetition of these touches and visitings from the beyond fixes the gods in their upward gaze and expectation. Constant repetition fixes them in a constant passivity. Not moving out any longer to grasp at the forms of the universe, mind, life and senses, will more and more be fixed in the memory, in the understanding, in the joy of the touch and vision of that transcendent glory, which they have now resolved to make their sole subject. To that only they will learn to respond, and not to the touches of outward things. We'll read the rest later, but here we have already got a first sense of what these verses are describing and the nature of this transition. When first one has a beautiful glimpse of something which is beyond the form, it does not last. So the first thing we notice, the coming of the glimpse happens in a flash. It does not slowly build up. Suddenly you open, it's a surprise often. The second thing we notice, it does not last. It either fades out or it stops, as in the blink of the eye. So this characteristic is described by the symbol of the flash of lightning. In the Vedic vocabulary, as you're aware, the lightning is a symbol of the perception, the power of the intuition, which comes similarly in a flash. Imagine you're walking in the middle of the night in a landscape that you cannot see because all is dark. And as you move about, there's a flash of lightning. In that single moment, you see everything. And the picture fades. But there is as if the afterglow of the light. There's the flash is gone, but in your eyes, the vision remains and fades out. Exactly the same thing happens within us when there is a divine inspiration, intuition, revelation. A flash, and the image fades out gradually. So in the text, you will see, now this is the indication of that, as is this flash of the lightning upon us. So this is an indication of that. Meaning, every time that our senses are looking at all these forms, of course they are seeing only the forms, they attach only to the forms, our emotions attach to the forms and so on. Turn in passivity to that, you feel, to perceive behind the forms. And that comes in a flash. All of us have had at some time or other some experience along these lines where suddenly everything in the universe appears so beautiful. There is as if a sacred presence, and then it passes. Sometimes it happens as part of a meditation, we receive something, or on a special occasion, because we're receptive on our birthdays, and something comes, and momentarily the sight opens. Although physically we are seeing the same forms, the inner sight is seeing beyond the physical forms to the divine presence which they conceal. And it sees or senses that to whatever degree, and everything looks so beautiful. This is the indication of that. And the flash of the lightning falling upon us. Now, in the Sanskrit text, there are interesting suggestions, the full text of which we will study next time, but the wording, when he says, now this is the indication of that, tasya esha adesho. This, of that, this is the indication. But the word used for indication is adesha. Again, very suggestive, because in the Sanskrit, a word does not have a flat idea meaning only. It has an experiential content which sometimes covers many ideas. Adesha, you will see, also used in Sanskrit to indicate command, order. When you will recall from Sri Aurobindo's life, when he says he had to go to Pondicherry, it came as an Adesh. And the Adesh was simply go to Pondicherry. And he says, I didn't question, I just took the next ship and went. Now what is that Adesha? You can translate as command, but here in this context you can see, it's much more than that. It's that flash of lightning revealing. But what does it reveal? It's not just a picture. It reveals also a power. There's the light and the heat and the content of the experience which is lit up and awakened. This physical light is only known by its effect of reflection on the surface. So when you shine a torch on a stone, well, you see only its reflection of the surface. But the true light is not only superficial, it penetrates. And we know this because if we actually look at the higher frequencies of light, they go right through, like the X-ray, isn't it? And so that light, when it reveals not just the surface skin, it reveals the full flesh and content inside. Okay? And it is not a light which is merely reflecting, it is a light in which what it reveals is what you are. There's an identification. So the nature of that flash of revelation, of the intuition, is an experience awakened in you. Oh, suddenly you are different, you see different, you feel different, you experience different, and what you know is what you are. It penetrates. Okay? So when Sri Aurobindo receives the Adesha, it is not words reflecting in his mind, it is this knowledge given in certainty, but not his, he knows, it has come from above. And it reveals, this. Of course, it may take the form of a command or an image of words, that is secondary. The thing is known in its identity. So this word, tasya esha adesho. And then the next word, yad etad vidyuto, vyadyutada. She translates as in this flash of the lightning upon us. Flashing of the lightning. Vidyut here is the lightning. And this is, you see, the same word used for electricity. And if you go into the sense of the word, it has this sense also of something rapid, something moving, something having both at the same time a force as well as an illumination. This is the nature also of the electricity. It moves so rapidly, almost instantaneously, it's there, at the speed of light, we will say. What is there from here to here? Not the electrons moving. You can actually measure the speed in a wire, and the speed is quite slow. In fact, remarkably slow. The electron moving has to bounce around atoms, and they say typically it moves 6 centimeters per second. But the electricity has moved instantaneously for 300,000 miles. What moved? Not the electrons. The electrons were dragged along by the electricity moving. What is electricity? It's the pure force pushing. Force which pushes, but thing moving is not physical, it is pure force. If you look at the wire internally, nothing has changed. Structurally, it is exactly the same. Pure force in movement. And this is the nature of the Vidyut. A flash with a force instantaneously revealing, lighting up. So the flashing of the lightning upon us. And so Sri Aurobindo in his commentary puts it thus: it comes by flashes, revelations, sudden touches and glimpses. Now these three words, revelations, touches and glimpses, would capture three different facets of the experience. The revelation itself is something much more complete. We have even in the Sanskrit the different terms used to describe these. Sri Aurobindo describes in the working of the intuition in us four facets which are the characteristics, and it is the same Vedic symbolism here. One is intuition, where the sense of the experience is much more like a touch. You feel something is okay or not okay. And the nature of that feel, and if you feel somebody, observe somebody indicating, somehow this doesn't quite feel right, you're as if touching something. You're not seeing, there's no imaging. There's a sense of contact, and in the contact, an identification. The second form is inspiration, where it takes the form of a word. But in the word you feel the power of the word. And yet there's an articulation in words. And therefore this is the form it takes when you have inspired poetry. Or in the Adesh that Sri Aurobindo describes, go to Pondicherry. Boom, it's there. The third type is revelation. So intuition, inspiration and revelation. In the revelation is the sight. You see. And the fourth characteristic is discrimination. It separates that which is true from that which is not. And you feel as if a separation taking place. There was a story which was narrated and I caught the essence. Yes, that's true. But the form of the story, I feel something is clouded, mixed, not reliable. And you feel that separation, that distinction. In the yogic tradition, we have this famous story, myth you may say, of the swan. And these are not ordinary swans, obviously. They are swans which belong to a higher region. But the story goes that you take a bowl of milk and mix into it water, and you offer it to the swan. And the swan drinks the milk, leaves behind the water. It's a very interesting idea. If you try it out, none of the swans that we know are able to do this. So of course we will say, oh, they are the swans of the heaven. But why do you call them swan then? In the vocabulary of yoga, Hansa, the swan, is also the movement of the soul in its ascent. Leap in sight towards the divine. Pure white in its purity. Its neck, long neck, when the swans fly, the neck stretches out and the wings gently move, almost as if in slow motion, and it moves almost effortlessly. That's the nature of the soul's turn towards the divine and the movement. The neck reaching out is the consciousness thinning out in its intense aspiration, focused on that. So the Hansa is the symbol of the soul moving towards the divine. And the soul, when it meets the experiences of the life, in which the sap, the juice of the divine essence of all experience, rasa, is mixed with the forms of life, that's the mix that is being given to you, the milk and the water mixed. And the soul takes from it what it needs of the rasa for its nourishment. It grows, leaving behind the rest. But this ability to separate out that which is true from that which is superficial appearance or mixed or even untrue, this ability is innate to the soul's perception. It is innate to the divine intuition, inspiration, and revelation. So these are four characteristics of that which comes in the flash. So he uses these terms: revelations, sudden touches, and glimpses. There is, as if, a leap of the lightning of revelation flaming out from those heavens for a moment and then returning into its secret source. So the suggestion is very interesting. It's not that like the lightning, physical lightning flashes and it's gone. Here the lightning is something which comes and then goes back. Remember, I discussed earlier, when the flash takes place, the lightning has stopped, but in the eyes the after image remains. So in our subjective experience, we have as if something lit up and then fading out as it withdraws. That's the subjective experience in the physical world. But in the subtle consciousness, in our own subtle body, we experience when there is the intuition, revelation, it's as if something fills us. It fills us, and momentarily we are changed, we are different. And then it's as if it fades out, but it goes away somewhere. The precision with which it captures the spiritual experience is important here. We find that the nature of the experience of the intuition is something descending to settle in us, almost like a substance of light. As long as that is there, the experience remains. Often what happens, we go to sleep, we wake up and it's gone. So on birthdays, it's a very common experience. You're all attuned, you're preparing from a few days before, psychologically. And then on the birthday, you're all ready to receive. Maybe you visit Sri Aurobindo's room, or you have a special concentration and you receive something. You're uplifted. There's a light, there's a joy, there's a fullness. The world looks so different. The world looks so beautiful. Life is so beautiful and worthwhile. And you wish it could be like this all the time. And so you meet a few people, maybe you get overwhelmed with too many people, and of course that dissipates when you get tired. Or, well, I just had a heavy lunch, so I will take a nap, go to sleep, I wake up, it's all gone. All gone. Where has it gone? I don't know, I can't feel it. At best you have the afterglow, something which remains. If at that time you take trouble to once again concentrate, to once again interiorize, recall what came earlier, you can recover. You find out it's not gone, it just got covered up by the inertia of the sleep. When certain experiences come and they gradually recede, one can find in a slight shift of altered consciousness, we can recover it. You lose that altered state and you lose it. And so Mother explains, it does not go away, it recedes into the background, into the inner, deeper layers from which it had come forward. And so this is what he describes here. A revelation flaming out from those heavens for a moment and then returning into its secret source. Now this is in fact represented in the physical process of the lightning. You see, the Vedic vision actually saw all physical objects and all nature processes as representative of things which are natural in the higher spiritual domains. And this experience of something descending as in the lightning in fact follows in the physical process also this. If you see lightning falling to the earth, there's a zigzag of the flash. It comes to hit, it touches, and then you can see the same pattern breaking, withdrawing. It cuts a passage through, makes the contact, there is a discharge of the electricity, we may say, but as the electricity discharges, the form of the lightning is seen to withdraw until it disappears. Very interesting. You can provoke it, you can call the lightning. You put up a rod, we call it a lightning rod, connect it to the earth, and the lightning finds it a receptive point. It comes, touches, discharges, and again withdraws. Very interestingly. Why that point? Because it's the point which in aspiration reached up highest. If you were to look at a group of human beings, from the perception of consciousness and aspiration only, you'll see a large part of humanity not bothered. Aspiration is dimmed or unconscious. In a few it is more awake, in a few it is intensely aspiring, and that movement is like the lightning rod, something reaching up. And when the descent takes place, those are the points where it is received first. And this flaming out from the heavens and returning into its secret source. Secret because we are not conscious of that domain yet. As if the lifting of the eyelid of an inner vision and it's falling again, because the eye cannot look long and steadily on the utter light. So there is a physical vision. You open your eyes, you look at the sun, and immediately your eyes close. It's too bright, too intense. But the same thing happens with the inner vision. Something of the inner sight opens and again closes, too intense, too bright. So again you see this symbolism of the physical sight replicating the inner sight. In fact, this is the case when something is received first, and in the inner sight one feels, one receives, you can't hold for too long, and you need to turn away. You need to ground yourself, so to say, otherwise you tend to be overwhelmed. Mother even makes this comment. She says, if the current sight that we have were to turn upon the supramental sun, it would see it as black. And why? Because it is unable to register that brilliance of light. It can only know it in its terms, which is splitting it up, breaking it into contrary pieces. And since that is a consciousness of unity, it cannot break it, it sees it as black. So it's almost as if we are blinded, except the eyes are never blinded, the inner eyes are never blinded. They just don't see. They are blinded, they see it as black, then that's it. The eyelid of the inner vision, and it's falling. We'll take a brief moment to explore this, but eventually one has to look and find its full understanding in the experience. You notice we have a physical sight. You open your eyes, you see, you close your eyes. We have also a second thing which we call a mind's eye. So you open your eyes, look at the picture, close your eyes and hold the picture in your mind's eye. Easy to do, right? You look at the scenery, close your eyes, and seeing in your mind's eye, describe to me the scenery. You can actually go around, pick up the details, some of which you may have not consciously registered when you first looked with physical eyes. So we have distinctly this experience that there is something we may call the mind's eye, some kind of an inner sight, of which the physical eye is like a physical projection. Now in your mind's eye, you are able to see different things which physically do not exist. So you can, for example, close your eyes and picture a blue circle. Now picture a red square behind the blue circle disk. Yes, you can see it in your mind's eye. If I start describing more and more details to be filled in, you will find automatically your physical eyes tend to close as the mind's eye has to picture these details. You could do the same thing with your physical eyes open. With your physical eyes open, now picture this red square, picture upon it a blue disc, picture upon that a green triangle. You can keep doing that. But after a while you notice your seeing is on the inner sight, not on the physical sight. At that moment somebody could walk by and you would not notice who it was. Because you're busy seeing in the mind's eye, not in the physical eye. So we've actually in our human experience a double sight which are overlaid one upon the other. In your attention you can be more on the mind's eye or more on the physical eye. In reality, most children are much more on the physical eye. So they notice things. Most adults are busily lost in their minds thinking or their emotions wandering. And so they are seeing much more in the mind's eye. And I register just enough, oh, it is so and so. I know who it is. I didn't notice that the so and so is wearing shoes which are not matching. It registered in my physical retina, it registered in my brain, it registered in some part of my mind, but not in the part where I was attentive. You see? So we have to recognize this double sight which is operating always. And the mind's eye often clouds the physical eye, the physical sight, if the mind is prejudiced. If in the mind you have been told that this is going to be bad, you're already preparing for a bad experience, you will be slanted to experience it as bad. Often this is what happens with our taste. Be careful, this drink is very sour or too sweet, and now when I drink it, I'm already prejudiced and will register it as more sweet than it should have been. This effect is used very powerfully in advertising to bias, to create associations. When you see now an object, this is an ordinary mobile phone, the images associated with the advertising come in. The feeling of the advertising comes in. You see, if you look at soft drinks, and we are unfortunately in most of the world now split between only two companies, all of which produce only water in which you have mixed chemicals. Every flavoring, every coloring, every taste and smell is chemically produced. There's nothing which is real, natural fruit, healthy. It's just a chemical cocktail. You drink one, you drink the other, there's only a difference of bias. This is slightly more bitter, slightly less sweet, whatever combination. Why do people want that soft drink? The advertising has this bright colors of people dancing in the beach and having great fun and being happy and so excited and so relaxed and so wealthy and comfortable and all those things which have been imprinted upon you emotionally with the picture of this brand name thrown in. Now when I pick up that object, it looks dull, it looks dirty, it's been exposed to dust on the side of the road when I'm going to drink it. I drink it, if I focus purely on the taste, it's quite undesirable. But it is those things which pop up and cloud in the mind's eye what the physical senses show. And so much of our life is just this constructed reality, I would even say unreal, false reality. We notice, therefore, a physical sense and the mind sense overlaying each other. And this is for all the senses, not just the sight, even the sound, etc. If you know, I'm going to play a beautiful piece of music from so and so great artist, I'm already ready now to enjoy it. I know it's going to be enjoyable. You see? So that has overlaid the experience. Similarly, there is a third gradation of perception, which is more fine. But its relationship is similar to the way the mind's eye relates to the physical eye. It overlays these sights of the mind seeing with a deeper grade of consciousness. We will use the word here, intuitive. Its seeing can overlay in the same way the other three. But its seeing is slightly different. Just as the mind's eye, the feel of what you see is different than the physical eye. That feel is slightly different. That seeing, you experience an identification with what you see. When some of us have had the experience of a vision, or sometimes in a state of meditation or prayer, we have the perception of what may be described as only a beautiful scene, the images of which are not so important, it is the experience of it which is more important. Then it's happening in that layer, the third layer. The perception of the soul within us, the perception of the divine within things, filling all things, is taking place there. And because we have never consciously developed that gradation of consciousness and its sight, we do not see that. And if by a conscious process of training, one learns to detach from the mind's consciousness and seeing to that deeper grade of seeing, and this is what one would do in a deeper inward meditation, then in that sight, it's natural to see only that which is the underlying reality behind. The underlying reality of the divine presence in things, of the divine presence within you, and all the things associated with that are natural to that sight. In fact, the experience is slightly more complex. That experience would be your first, and then you would discover there's still a deeper grade of consciousness with its own deeper seeing, which increasingly becomes more, and many layers perhaps, which increasingly become less and less form, more and more essence. What you see is the essence. And you notice at that point, all these successive gradations of sight are moving from essence, perception of essence within, to perception of superficiality on the outside. The most superficial being physical sight. It looks at the flower, it sees only shape of petals and color. The slightly deeper mind's eye sees in this flower an association. Ah, this is beautiful. The physical sight in itself does not express beauty, it is just a description. The beauty sense comes in the mind, and with that an idea of all the things which are associated with this flower. But the thing behind, the third gradation of sight, feels, oh, it's conscious, it's alive, it's looking at me, it's happy to be with me. See, that feeling you will get, especially when you've received a flower which has been blessed. When mother gave a flower, she explained that she put into it something, a special force, a special consciousness. And the flower was the most sensitive and receptive vehicle to be able to receive what she gave in its purity and to be able to transmit it to you in its purity. Now the same thing could have been done through a stone, but a stone has a limited capacity to hold, a flower has a much finer capacity to hold the psychic, and for us also to receive from it is easier because we can relate to the flower. It's alive, it's conscious, we can relate to the presence there. And you'll see the flowers are different, they're happier, they're somehow glowing with a light, ethereal. Do this as an experiment. Observe the flowers just outside the ashram gate. If you find people selling flowers, observe those flowers, even if they are fresh. And then you enter the ashram building and look at the flowers there in the pots. If you put yourself in a state of interiorization, some kind of a calm, half meditative state, you will see more easily. These flowers which have been in the ashram building, they're somehow glowing, more conscious, more alive, more happy to be. And this sometimes happens to us also when we are walking under a tree. You'll see many flower trees around here. You'll see one flower that's fallen on the road, it calls to you as if. Because it's as if more conscious. It says, here, take me. You could ignore it, or you could pick it up and then take it and fulfill its purpose, offer it to the divine, whatever form it takes. So this perception is coming in this third layer. And increasingly as our consciousness deepens or heightens, the perception from there becomes more and more of the essential deeper within. Until at the point somewhere inside, we see the soul of the flower. You look at a person and you see the soul of the person. The form blurs. The physical form is almost irrelevant when you have that. You can defocus. Just as in the mind's eye, you can focus on what the mind's perception, automatically your physical sight tends to not be so vivid, blurred, or even don't notice. The same thing happens from this inner sight. I will share with you an incident which was narrated by one of the mother's attendants who was physically with the mother, and she's narrated it to me personally. She was Swarnadi, living upstairs, spending her time upstairs in mother's room. Mother kept as an attendant there. And one day she called me and told me many things like this and said, one day it will be useful for you. And that was it. So one of the incidents she narrated here was this, that being with the mother, no, it was, maybe I'm mixing the person, doesn't matter. The source doesn't matter. So this attendant with the mother would be with the mother when she was playing tennis. And the mother looked at different people on the court. And remember, she was playing tennis till the age of 80. She would point to somebody and say, who is that person? And her attendant would tell her the name. And this happened over a span of time. Again and again, she would ask for certain people. And afterwards, the person, the lady with the mother, noticed something. And she asked the mother, Mother, every time that you point out this person, you ask who is this person, it's always a woman. Why is that? So mother explained that when she was seeing the person, she was not seeing the physical form, but the whole personality. The inner, we may use the word the aura and the inner psychological dimensions of the subtle bodies of the emotions and mind. She explained that because of whatever the then social circumstances, 1950s, women had not been allowed to develop their individuality. And so the whole subtle body form was more fluid, not formed, not individualized enough, not concretized in its shape. With men, that was more developed, so she would see that more easily. But here, because the form was more fluid and blurred, she had difficulty recognizing. And so she needed this person to say what it was. So now you're seeing here something fascinating. Okay, then the mother said, but all this, she said, belongs to the past. She said, now that I am here, all this will change. And of course, it is our experience that over the decades, this balance has changed. Today, women equally with men often have a fully developed individuality. And the origin of this whole effort, you will find the earliest efforts being done here in the ashram. Where in the late 1940s, the mother had women wear exactly the same shirts and shorts as the men, do exactly the same physical exercises as the men, going through all the training equally together, which was revolutionary at that time for the whole world. She set the prototype here, began a certain process which has continued and rapidly spread now all over the world. Now this is considered normal. But at that time in the 50s, it was a time in most countries in the world, including in England and Switzerland and many European countries, women were considered second-class citizens. They didn't have the right to vote. Switzerland gave the right to vote only in 1971. Why? Because, well, they're women. What do you expect of them, right? So the whole starting assumption was they are less capable. Less capable, you ensure their capability is not developed, and you keep them always unformed, undeveloped. That had been the case for a very long time in most parts of the world. And mother said, now that I have come, all this will change. It was one of the works that she had to take up, and she has done. The change is obvious. And this change alone is such a huge revolution in human history. It's such a huge revolution that the future of humanity is changed. In part, it was through social processes. When the Second World War started, you didn't have enough people to run the governments in Europe. So they had to take women, give them the same responsibilities that men handled. So here was a social process. But still, that's not enough. One could still have kept them suppressed and on. But all that has broken. The old structures are so deeply broken that today to think of not bringing up a child in the same way is unacceptable. And this is the huge change having been made in less than 50 years all over the world. One of the many changes. And all of these are the result of an action of a spiritual power working through the minds and hearts of human beings. But I'm coming to this as an example only because you see how the inner sight looks at the inner reality while the outer sight looks at the outer reality. And all these layers of our perception together give you the full perspective, the full perception of anything. You will see when the inner sight begins to open more and more, every object has as if a kind of an ethereal glow of light, presence, consciousness. It is aware, awake, and the glow, the color represents, reflects the quality of the consciousness. Just as in the human being one perceives the aura, every object has its particular consciousness. And it is sometimes so beautiful. And because the inner sight sees through, it sees transparently, translucently. You will find these descriptions in Sri Aurobindo's Savitri as Ashwapati ascends the gradations of the worlds. When he enters the subtle world, physical objects are translucent, glowing with the beauty and perfection of light. And all of that, as you go higher up, becomes more and more essential. This gives you some sense of what is described here. In the flash that comes, there is this deeper perception which comes forward. But at first it comes as a flash because the eyelids open, the inner sight opens but cannot retain and closes. And it is only by a repeated process like this that one gets habituated. The inner vision develops, grows, turns upwards, gets used to the passivity needed to be able to hold that higher perception until it becomes permanent and constant. So we'll continue this text and the further nuances of this next Sunday. We can take a brief moment to concentrate and in preparation for the new year, consciously align ourselves to all the gifts that the new year brings with it. On the deeper levels, perhaps glimpsing with our inner sight, if we can, or invoking with our deeper aspiration.